Hello and welcome on Radio Worldwide. My name's Valerie Duracell. Today we're going to speak about the economical crisis. With the UK facing a new recession period after 2009 and drastic austerity measures being planned, many Britons are worried about the future of the country and their own. Giuseppe Fontana, professor of monetary economics at Leeds University Business School, says the cuts are not going to help for the future.
This is one of the most dramatic and severe economic recession experienced by developed countries in the world. Possibly can only be compared to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So I understand perfectly that people are a lot of anxiety about their future, the future generation. I mean, we have just been going through some of the recent data about youth unemployment in the euro area. Which is quite worrying. I mean, if you think a country like Italy, which for instance is a quite advanced country, I mean, is part of the G7, the level of youth unemployment over 30%. And if you consider that as an average between North and South, you can imagine what is the level of youth unemployment in the south of Italy. Same type of story for Germany. So there are really difficult times, and it is reasonable that the people are very anxious about their future, especially young people.
So you just talked about the young generation, which I am from. Can you understand that the young generation, those who were born from the 1980s, don't understand the term crisis anymore because we lived with it all our life long?
Yes, that's an interesting point. It's true that the 80s were a very difficult time, but starting in early 90s, we had a period of very low and constant level of inflation and quite high level of output and employment, which meant that some of those problems that we are facing now may come as, in a sense, as a shock for people that were not used to it. And the reason, in a sense, why we are going through this crisis is that maybe the policy that were implemented in the 90s were probably not the best one. So in a sense, the way in which we could present to the younger generation is that the seeds of what we are experiencing today come in the year in which they were born and they were growing up. So in a sense, it's the price for things that were not done right in the early 90s and in the previous decade.
We had a recent crisis with all the bank histories. Where did the problem come from this time? And didn't we learn anything from the previous crisis?
What is happened is that, as you were just mentioning, the financial crisis started in the summer 2007. It was, as the word, was a financial crisis. It was not a real world crisis, but soon spread to the real sector, because when there is not enough liquidity in the economy, the real sector suffers. There are no investment, people cannot buy goods and services, and then slowly spread to the government sector. And the reason for that is that, of course, as a result of the dramatic slowdown in the real sector, the government around the world had to intervene through, for instance, fiscal stimulus or monetary policy. But more than that was that because the recession was quite strong, the government had less tax income. Because, of course, if people get unemployed, they don't get an income, and so they don't pay tax because they don't have any income. If people experience a reduction in their income, they pay less tax. So overall, what happens is that the government get less tax income, and as a result, the difference between what they spend and what they received get bigger. So that's why now we talk about a government deficit. So if you compound all the things I'm saying, is basically we had the crisis of the banking sector and the financial sector, which then spread to the real sector, and which as a result of what is happening to the real sector has then spread to the government sector. And I will add that in 2007, 2008, governments around the world, all united, tried to overcome the issues created by this lack of liquidity. Now, what we are experiencing now is that the government are acting on a national basis rather than an international basis, which is creating problem of coordination of fiscal and monetary policy.
We have these cuts plans in the UK. Is it a good solution?
Personally, I think, and I've been arguing this for a long time, no. They are basically increasing the chance, and now we almost confirm that we are going again in recession in this country. Now, the problem is the financial crisis spread to the real sector, okay? And how that manifests himself. There was a reduction in the demand of goods and services that people were buying, okay? So the government step in to solve some of those issues, which of course made their deficit, as I was explaining before, bigger. Now, as a result of that, some policymakers are thinking that we should reduce the government deficit. But if you reduce the government deficit, basically you are reducing the demand for goods and services coming from the government sector. Now, if we have a problem with the private sector and then you reduce what comes from the government sector, basically you will have a collapse in the demand of goods and services. And there is nothing else to sustain the economy.
So what would be a good idea to put the economy back on track? Some people talk about reducing prices of goods, helping having 50% job instead of full-time job. What would be your idea?
What we are experiencing is what economists call a deficiency of aggregate demand. So in other words, people are not buying enough goods and services. And therefore, the firms that produce those goods and services are laying off people, so unemployment is increasing, or they are not hiring new people. So what we need to do really is to make sure that the economy kickstarts again. And how do you do it? You need to boost the demand. Now, the private sector is not going to hire people because there is no demand for it. So the only sector that could boost demand, because it's not driven by profit, is the government. So what I will argue is that what we should do is to boost government expenditure. Now, the problem with that is that if I boost government expenditure in UK, so for instance, the government increase spending, well, people that get, for instance, salary because they work in the public sector may buy French good, Italian good, American good. So what you really need is that there must be a coordination of fiscal policy, in other words, of government spending across the nation. So if UK raise government spending and France and Italy and United States, they all do the same, that means that the global demand for goods and services rise. So it is possible some British people will buy Italian goods, but it's also likely then some Italian people will buy British goods. And so therefore the entire world economy will be boosted. And I think by doing that, then of course firms will see an increase in demand, so they will start to hire people. And as they start to hire people, of course, the tax income for the government will increase, and so on and so forth. So I think what is missing now is the lack of coordination of fiscal policy across the world.
You said it has to be a coordination. Therefore, it would be good for Europe, at least for the economic sector, to find a common solution. Because I was thinking, is it a good way to come out of the crisis on our own? Can a country live on its own?
Not really, you're right. It is in a world in which we live, that is a very globalized world, countries must act together. We had in the past experience, for instance, of France during the Mitterrand period of boosting demand, but on its own, and that didn't lead to a better outcome in France. And not have succeeded, probably because of that reason. The reason being that the stimulus was only at the national level. So most of that stimulus actually went through other countries. So we need to coordinate the policy. In the euro area, certainly is a quite big economic area and a lot could be done. But again, in order to have the maximum effect, we should make sure that not only euro, and so the euro area, but also United Kingdom, United States, and other countries around the world create a stimulus, fiscal stimulus.
Do you think there is any possible way for us, European and Western countries, to continue living our lives as we used to? Or will this crisis change everything?
This is a very good question, and I think it's important that listeners realize that all what happens in the economy is man or woman made. It's not an act of nature. It's only because the policy that be made by individuals, they may not have the desired effect. So, for instance, the austerity measure, you're sure they are done with all the good intention, but they are wrong. And the outcome of those austerity measures, for instance, like the recession in United Kingdom, is the result of those policy measures. So if you change the policy, of course you can have different result, and therefore you could have maintained lifestyle that we have experienced for a very, very long time. Of course, things need to be changed, in particular in this country. The consumer-led growth that we had before was driven by this excess liquidity circulating in the economy, which has led to the problem we are facing now. So the question is, of course, that need to be changed. But it doesn't mean that we have to go back to the Middle Age. We can still have a society in which people will find a job if they want to work and they have a decent pay. It's the tools that they allow to achieve those goals that may need to change. And in particular, policy have to change.
How do you imagine the world, or at least Europe's economy, in 20, 40 years?
Well, I hope that I'm an optimistic person. I hope that will be a world in which some of those problems we are facing now, in particular the high level of unemployment and youth unemployment, will disappear. I hope there will be a united state of Europe, because that's the only way I think you could have coordination of fiscal and monetary policy at euro area level. And I hope that the rich cultural background that characterize individuals in the European countries will be part of a common state. I'm optimistic that that could be achieved. It will not be easy, but we own a future to the young generation. So we must make sure that there will be a future for them. Modern economics is an economics that take into account not only the level of economic growth, in particular of income, but also takes into account that we may have soon to face a physical limit to what we can produce in our country. So I'm thinking in terms of the effect of climate change and so on. So I think in future economics need to consider that there could be physical limit in which we can produce. And if we don't find the technology which solve some of those problems, well, we need to start to think about a different way of organizing the way in which we live.
This was Giuseppe Fontana, Professor of Monetary Economics at Leeds University Business School.